You've probably seen it before. Learn AWS in 30 days. It sounds motivating, exciting even, but for most beginners, it's often misleading and sets you up for disappointment. Let's talk about why that is and what a better approach looks like. Promises like learn in 30 days are so popular because they cater to a very human desire. As a beginner stepping into a massive, complex world like cloud computing, you want certainty. You want a clear roadmap, a finish line. You want to know exactly when things will finally click and make sense. That desire for a clear timeline is completely normal. But it's also what makes these quick fix promises so tempting and potentially harmful. This is where the problem really starts. What does it actually mean to learn AWS? The phrase itself is incredibly vague. Does it mean you can pass a certification exam? Does it mean you know how to open the console and click around? Maybe it means you deployed a simple web application one time. The truth is, AWS isn't one single skill you can just learn. It's a vast ecosystem of over 200 services, each with its own depth and purpose. Saying you can learn AWS in a month is like saying you can learn science in a month. It just doesn't capture the scale of what you're dealing with. When you put a strict 30-day deadline on learning something as huge as AWS, your behavior changes, and not for the better. You start to rush. You skim through documentation instead of reading it. You start memorizing answers for practice exams instead of truly understanding the underlying concepts. You focus on ticking boxes and getting through the material as fast as possible. This approach doesn't build deep, lasting knowledge. It creates shallow knowledge, where you might recognize a service's name but have no idea how it actually works or when to use it. This leads to a very common and frustrating experience for beginners. They finish a 30-day course or a boot camp, and they still feel completely lost and confused. They might have touched on dozens of services EC2, S3, Lambda, RDs, but nothing feels connected. They don't understand how these pieces fit together to solve a real-world problem. And the worst part, they often blame themselves. They think, I must not be smart enough, or I must have done something wrong. They don't realize that the problem was never them. It was the unrealistic timeline they were trying to follow. Now, I want to be clear. 30 days is not useless. A focused 30-day period can be incredibly valuable. In 30 days, you can absolutely get exposure to the AWS ecosystem. You can learn the fundamental concepts, like what regions and availability zones are. You can get comfortable navigating the console and reduce that initial fear and intimidation. You can even build a small project. But that is exposure, not mastery. It's the first step of a much longer journey. Seeing these aggressive timelines everywhere creates a culture of comparison that is toxic for beginners. You look at these promises and then at your own progress, and you start to feel like you're falling behind. You think you're slow. You think everyone else is getting it faster than you are. But here's the secret. You are comparing your real, messy, day one beginning to someone else's perfectly edited, polished marketing story. True learning is never that clean or that fast. So, how is AWS actually learned? It's learned in layers, not in a linear sprint over a set number of days. The process looks more like this. You learn a basic concept, like how an EC2 instance works. Then you move on to something else and probably forget some of the details. Later, a new project forces you to revisit EC2, and this time, you understand it on a deeper level. Each pass, each project, each problem you solve adds another layer of clarity and context. It's a cyclical process of learning, forgetting, and relearning, with each cycle making you stronger. The real skill that most tutorials and 30-day plans completely ignore is building context. It's not about memorizing what each service does. It's about understanding why these services exist. How do they connect to each other? What business problems do they solve? When should you choose to use one service over another? That kind of deep contextual knowledge is the difference between a technician and an architect, and it simply cannot be rushed. It comes from experience, from building things, and from making mistakes. So, I encourage you to adopt a better mindset. Focus on progress over speed. Stop asking, how fast can I learn this? And start asking, how clearly do I understand this? Is your knowledge getting deeper? Are the connections between services becoming clearer? That's the real measure of progress. A healthy and productive 30 days of learning AWS looks more like this. Spend the time understanding the core concepts without rushing. Practice slowly and deliberately. Build one or two small things that actually interest you. And most importantly, Take the time to review the things that confused you. Don't just skip over them. That slow, intentional practice is what sets you up for long-term success. It builds a solid foundation for the next phase of your learning journey. If you've tried a 30-day plan and AWS still feels overwhelmingly hard, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You are not failing. You are not behind. You are learning something incredibly complex, and you are doing it the right way, the way that leads to real understanding. Here's the simple truth. AWS is a professional platform used to run global companies, from startups to massive enterprises. It's not a simple tool you can master in a weekend tutorial. It's normal and expected for it to take time. Be patient with yourself. Timelines can be great for motivation, but they can also mislead you and create unnecessary pressure. In the end, clarity always beats speed. Focus on understanding, not on counting the days. Learning AWS is a journey, not a countdown. Thank you for watching.